What happens when one of Hollywood's most respected actresses walks onto a stage expecting a routine, friendly interview, and instead finds herself under fire from every angle? That's exactly what unfolded that morning on The View. The studio lights blazed down, reflecting off the polished surfaces of the sleek set, and the hum of anticipation from the live audience created a low, vibrating tension in the air. Cameras clicked into position, red record lights glowed, and the familiar chatter of the audience gave way to silence as the show went live. This was supposed to be a normal conversation about Scarlett Johansson's latest film. Instead, it became a study in power, perception, and confrontation, one that viewers across the world would soon dissect, discuss, and replay endlessly. Scarlett Johansson walked onto the stage, her posture poised but relaxed, the signature confidence of someone who had navigated the cutthroat world of Hollywood for decades. She smiled warmly, extending a hand and greeting the hosts as though stepping into familiar territory. Whoopi Goldberg returned the gesture with her characteristic warmth, her smile bright but her eyes sharp, always alert to the subtle shifts in energy that make live television unpredictable. Sunny Hostin chimed in cheerfully, her voice a smooth counterpoint to the tension building beneath the surface. Sarah Haynes and Alyssa Farah Griffin mirrored the energy of a well-oiled ensemble, their expressions a mixture of curiosity and polite enthusiasm. So, Scarlett, welcome back to The View. We're so excited to have you here, Whoopi said, her voice calm but inviting. Thank you so much for having me. It's always great to be here, Scarlett replied, her tone warm, the slightest inflection of nerves hidden behind practiced ease. She settled into her seat, crossing her legs gracefully, her hands resting lightly on her lap. The cameras captured every micro-movement, the slight tightening of her jaw, the subtle flicker in her eyes, the brief inhalation before she spoke. Every detail would matter in the next few moments. Sunny leaned forward slightly, her voice rising above the quiet murmur of the audience. So, let's talk about this new film. Your character is a whistleblower who risks everything to expose corruption. What drew you to this role? Scarlett's gaze softened, her eyes briefly wandering to the audience before returning to the hosts. You know, I was really compelled by her courage. She's someone who sees something wrong and refuses to stay silent, even when it costs her everything. I spent time with real whistleblowers to understand that mindset, the sacrifices, the losses of relationships, sometimes even safety, all because they believe in doing what's right. Her voice carried a quiet reverence, and the audience leaned in subconsciously, captivated by the gravity of her words. That must have been intense research, Sarah remarked, her eyebrows lifting in genuine intrigue. Did any of their stories particularly stick with you? Oh, absolutely, Scarlett replied, her tone steady. One woman I spoke with told me that the hardest part wasn't even losing her job, it was losing friends who thought she should have just kept quiet. That really stayed with me. Her hands flexed slightly as she gestured, not aggressively, but to underscore the human weight of her words. Alyssa joined in smoothly. And you're producing this film through your production company as well, right? Yes, exactly. That was really important to me. I wanted to make sure this story was told authentically and that we weren't sensationalizing what these people go through, Scarlett explained, her eyes flicking between the hosts, measuring their reactions. Her posture remained calm, but there was a subtle tightening in her shoulders, a silent prelude to the storm brewing. I love that you're using your platform to tell these kinds of stories, Alyssa added supportively, leaning slightly forward. But the room's warmth shifted almost imperceptibly when Joy Behar's tone cut through, colder now, a hint of steel threading through her voice. Scarlett, I have to ask you something I think a lot of people are curious about. You've played quite a few roles over the years that sparked controversy. Don't you think, as someone with your level of fame, you have a responsibility to step aside for actors who actually have lived experience with these characters? The energy at the table shifted immediately. Whoopi's eyes widened slightly, Sunny's hands froze in mid-gesture, and even the audience seemed to hold its collective breath. Scarlett paused, the slight frown of concentration forming on her face as she recalibrated her tone. Joy, I think as actors, our job is to tell stories and inhabit characters. That's the nature of the profession, Scarlett began, her voice calm, but firm. But come on, you can't tell me you didn't know there would be backlash when you signed on to play a transgender man. What were you thinking? Scarlett's voice remained steady, controlled, but her fingers drummed lightly on her lap, a subconscious release of mounting tension. Actually, Joy, I thought I was taking on a challenging role that would bring an important story to audiences. And when I listened to concerns from the community, I stepped away from the project. A low murmur ran through the audience. The camera captured Joy leaning back in her chair, her expression one of barely concealed exasperation. After the damage was done, she shot back, voice sharper now, after you'd already taken the job away from a trans actor who could have used that opportunity, Joy, Whoopi interjected quickly, her hand raised, trying to smooth the escalation. I think we should. No, Joy interrupted, leaning forward, her eyes fixed on Scarlett with unwavering intensity. I want to hear her answer this. Scarlett's eyes met Joy's, a flicker of steel passing between them. Joy, with respect, I withdrew from that project years ago, after having productive conversations with people who helped me understand their perspective. I listened. I learned. And I made a different choice. I'm not sure what else you want me to say about a decision I already reversed. Joy leaned back again, crossing her arms, her voice dripping incredulity. I want you to acknowledge that you shouldn't have taken it in the first place. I just explained, Scarlett said, her tone even but laced with frustration, that I listened to the concerns and stepped away. I don't understand what more you're looking for here. Of course, you don't understand, Joy shot back sharply. That's exactly the problem. The room seemed to shrink around Scarlett, the warm glow of the studio lights suddenly harsh against her skin. The audience's murmurs grew quieter, tension thickening like fog. Sunny attempted a diversion, her hands folded neatly, voice calm but strained. Maybe we can talk about the advocacy work you've been doing, Scarlett. I know you've been very involved with several organizations. Thank you, Sunny. Yes, I'd love to talk about that, Scarlett said, her posture straightening, a deliberate reclaiming of control. I've been working with Time's Up and several other organizations focused on workplace equality and safety, particularly for women in entertainment. Sarah nodded, supportive. That's important work. But Joy wasn't finished. Her voice cut sharply through the calm. And yet you worked with Woody Allen. How do you reconcile doing advocacy work for women while having worked with someone who's been accused of such serious things? The air between Scarlett and Joy crackled like static electricity. The audience leaned forward instinctively, sensing the storm on the horizon. Whoopi's hand slammed lightly on the table, a jarring punctuation in the tension-soaked silence. Joy, I don't think that's, Scarlett inhaled slowly, eyes narrowing slightly. Joy. I made films with Woody Allen early in my career, and I've said publicly that I regret those choices. I was young. I didn't have the full understanding I have now. If I could go back and make different decisions, I would. Joy's expression hardened, eyes narrowing. But you can't go back. And meanwhile, you collected paychecks from him while his daughter was out there telling her story. Scarlett's jaw tightened, a flash of steel behind her calm veneer. Joy, I've addressed this. Multiple times. I've publicly stated my regrets. I've changed my approach to the projects I choose. I've put my money and my time into organizations fighting for change. What exactly would you consider real accountability? A heavy silence fell over the studio. The audience was silent, captivated, hanging on every word. Alyssa's eyes flicked nervously between the two women, Sarah's hands flexed slightly in her lap, and even Sunny looked caught between maintaining professionalism and watching the drama unfold. Scarlett leaned back slightly, her voice rising softly, almost as if she were speaking to herself as much as to Joy. I'm a human being who has made mistakes and actively tried to correct them. You're treating me like I've done nothing but cause harm, when that's simply not accurate. Joy leaned forward, her expression incredulous. "Oh, so now you're the victim." Poor Scarlett Johansson, getting asked tough questions. "That's not what I said at all," Scarlett replied, her tone ice-cold now, a quiet storm contained beneath her calm exterior. The tension was palpable. The studio lights seemed harsher, the audience collectively holding their breath. Every micro-expression, every twitch, every glance was magnified on the cameras, capturing a confrontation that felt both orchestrated and terrifyingly real. The conversation had shifted. What began as a routine interview had morphed into a high-stakes battle of accountability versus perception. The air was thick with anticipation, a storm waiting to break. And in that silence, the audience felt it, the moment was far from over. The studio air felt electric, charged with a tension so thick it seemed almost visible, shimmering above the glossy surface of the table. The audience, previously murmuring politely, was now silent, leaning forward in collective anticipation. Every heartbeat, every breath from the hosts and Scarlett was amplified by the hush. Scarlett Johansson's eyes didn't leave Joy Behar's, and in that gaze lay the quiet intensity of someone who had been pushed into a corner but refused to falter. The lights above glinted off Scarlett's hair, creating a halo-like edge against the cold sterility of the studio, casting sharp contrasts across the set. The stage, once bright and welcoming, now felt like a battleground. Joy leaned forward, her elbows pressing lightly against the polished table, fingers drumming a slow, deliberate rhythm. "You're very good at saying you've learned and grown," she said, her tone casual but razor-sharp. "But isn't it just public relations speak? Words to make the audience forget the mistakes." Scarlett's gaze flicked momentarily toward the cameras, registering the audience's collective intake of breath. Then, with a controlled exhale, she met Joy's stare again. "It's not public relations speak. It's the truth," she replied steadily, her voice carrying a mixture of indignation and measured calm. Every syllable was deliberate, controlled. Her hands, resting lightly on her lap, flexed slightly as if bracing herself for the next strike. Sunny attempted to interject, her tone carefully neutral, a fragile olive branch. "Maybe we can redirect, talk about some of the advocacy work you've been doing," but Joy wasn't letting go. "And yet you worked with Woody Allen," she snapped, voice sharper now, cutting through Sunny's attempt at diplomacy. The subtle smirk curling on her lips betrayed the satisfaction she took in the escalating tension. "How do you reconcile doing advocacy work for women while having worked with someone accused of such serious things?" A low murmur passed through the audience. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, sensing the storm intensifying. The camera panned slowly over Scarlett's face, capturing the microtension, the slight narrowing of her eyes, the minute flare of her nostrils, the subtle tightening of her jaw muscles. Her lips pressed together briefly, then parted as she chose her words carefully. "Joy, I made films with Woody Allen early in my career," she said, her voice rising just enough to carry authority. "I've said publicly that I regret those choices. I was young. I didn't have the full understanding I have now. And yes, if I could go back and make different decisions, I would." Joy leaned back, arms crossed, lips pursed in that familiar expression of incredulous judgment. "But you can't go back. Meanwhile, you collected paychecks while his daughter was out there telling her story." Scarlett's hands curled lightly on her lap. "Joy, I've addressed this multiple times. I've publicly stated my regrets. I've changed my approach to the projects I choose. I've put my money and my time into organizations fighting for change. What exactly would you consider real accountability?" A palpable silence descended over the studio, the kind of silence that amplifies every breath and makes each word feel like a drumbeat in a storm. The audience was frozen in place, caught between fascination and discomfort. Even the production crew, usually invisible behind the cameras, held their breath, waiting. Joy's eyes narrowed, leaning slightly forward. "Has she though? Or is this just another moment of carefully curated image management?" Scarlett's voice was ice, but low and dangerous, like the calm before a hurricane. "Joy, I don't know what you want from me. I've publicly acknowledged mistakes, I've explained how I've tried to do better. You seem determined to ignore that. Her posture shifted subtly, back straight, shoulders squared, a quiet declaration of resistance. Every micro-gesture radiated controlled intensity. Alyssa chimed in softly, almost whispering into the tension. I think what Scarlett is trying to say, she's trying to say she's learned and grown, which is what every celebrity says when they get called out, Joy interjected, her voice cutting over Alyssa's, dismissive and mocking. Scarlett's gaze sharpened. It's not PR speak. I'm a human being who has made mistakes and actively tried to correct them. You're treating me like I've done nothing but cause harm. Oh, so now you're the victim. Poor Scarlett Johansson, getting asked tough questions, Joy replied, a sly smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. That's not what I said, Scarlett countered, her voice now edged with a quiet, simmering anger. The audience shifted, sensing the tension coiling like a spring about to release. Every microphone, every lens, every eye in the studio seemed to focus solely on the two women. The room felt hotter, the lights harsher, shadows playing over Scarlett's angular features as she inhaled slowly. Joy leaned forward again, elbows on the table, her fingers tapping a deliberate rhythm against the wood. I'm holding you accountable, she said coldly. Scarlett's eyes narrowed. No, you're attacking me. There's a difference between accountability and looking for reasons to tear someone down. You've spent the last 10 minutes rehashing every mistake I've already addressed publicly and refusing to acknowledge growth or change. That's not accountability, it's a hit job. The audience murmured audibly this time, whispers rippling like wind across the rows. Whoopi's hand slammed on the table, punctuating the rising storm. Joy, that's enough, she said sharply. Scarlett has addressed this. But Joy's eyes were locked on Scarlett, unyielding. Has she though? She repeated, her tone almost theatrical now. Because it seems like she's very good at saying, I've learned. I've grown, but not actually taking real accountability. Scarlett inhaled, a low, controlled breath. Her hands tightened into fists on her lap, and her voice, when it came, was calm but unwavering. Joy, I don't know what you want from me. I've listened to the concerns, stepped away from projects, donated, advocated, and amplified other voices. I'm not sure what else you want. Joy leaned back, shaking her head slowly, a faint, cold smile curling. Maybe talk is cheap, she said softly, almost as if savoring the tension. Words don't matter when actions speak louder. Scarlett's voice rose slightly, commanding, a quiet storm in itself. It's not just words. I've put my money and time into organizations. I've stepped away from projects. I've used my production company to tell stories that otherwise wouldn't get told. I am actively trying to correct mistakes. What else do you want? The audience was spellbound. Every subtle micro-expression, the slight narrowing of eyes, the shallow inhale, the tense jawlines, the tapping fingers, the rigid shoulders, was magnified on screen, painting a picture of conflict so vivid it felt cinematic. The tension between the two women became almost tangible, a physical force that seemed to press down on the set, pressing the audience into the edge of their seats. Then Scarlett's gaze hardened, voice dropping into a near whisper that cut through the static energy of the room. I'm exhausted, Joy. I'm exhausted by people more interested in tearing down than building up. I'm exhausted by the idea that one mistake defines you forever. I'm exhausted by conversations that aren't actually conversations at all. Joy's smirk faltered for just a moment, her fingers halting their tap. Well, I'm exhausted by celebrities who think they can buy their way out of accountability with a few donations and pretty words about growth, she shot back, the sharpness of her voice slicing through the thickening tension. The camera slowly panned across the audience. Some gasped audibly, others sat frozen, their eyes wide. You could see the collective energy in the room, a mixture of disbelief, anticipation, and the unspoken understanding that a breaking point was imminent. Scarlett leaned forward slightly, her eyes piercing. What have you done, Joy? Besides sit here and judge people, she asked, her voice rising with controlled fury. The words echoed across the studio, and for a moment, the entire set seemed suspended in time. Sunny's hands flexed nervously, Sarah's lips pressed tightly together, Alyssa shifted uneasily in her seat. The co-hosts were caught in the tension like spectators to a duel. The cameras lingered on Scarlett's expression, capturing every micro-movement, the tightening of her jaw, the flare of her nostrils, the deliberate, controlled inhale before she continued. Joy's lips parted in a moment of surprise, almost like a predator caught off guard. "I'm not the one being interviewed here," she said, her tone defensive, wavering slightly. "Convenient," Scarlett replied, eyes narrowing. "You get to sit in judgment of everyone else, but never have to answer for yourself." The silence that followed was deafening. The tension had stretched taut, a wire about to snap. The audience leaned forward, breaths held, the energy thick with the anticipation of the next eruption. Scarlett's purse rested on her lap, fingers lightly brushing the strap, a subtle sign of readiness to leave or strike back verbally. Every muscle, every glance, every pause was deliberate, cinematic, and charged with emotion. And then, just as the storm seemed ready to break entirely, Scarlett leaned back, took a slow, deliberate breath, and uttered words that would leave everyone in the room, and viewers at home, holding theirs. "Maybe there isn't one for me," she said quietly, but with steel in her voice. The audience gasped audibly. Cameras zoomed in on Joy, whose expression faltered for the first time, revealing the faintest crack in her armor. The co-hosts froze, the tension snapping taut, a moment suspended in shock. The studio seemed to hold its breath, every second stretched and waited, the lights above harsh and unyielding, casting elongated shadows across the polished set. Scarlett Johansson's words, "Maybe there isn't one for me," had reverberated through the room like a physical pulse. The audience was frozen, caught between disbelief and the magnetic pull of the confrontation unfolding before them. The cameras lingered on Joy Behar's face, where the carefully crafted armor of her composure had started to show subtle cracks, a twitch in her jaw, a momentary widening of her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty barely perceptible but amplified by the lens. Scarlett's posture was rigid, yet calm. Her shoulders squared, fingers gripping the strap of her purse, a quiet declaration that she was in control of herself even if the room seemed to spiral. The tension was suffocating, the kind of charged stillness you feel in a cinematic thriller just before everything erupts. The studio, once a familiar stage of bright smiles and rehearsed banter, now felt like an arena under siege. Joy leaned forward again, her voice tighter now, an edge of desperation threading through her usual incisive tone. "You're right," she admitted, almost begrudgingly. "Maybe I have decided. Maybe that should tell you something." Scarlett's eyes sharpened, her voice low but cutting, each word deliberate. "It tells me you're more interested in being right than being fair. You came here to prove a point, not to have a conversation." The audience's collective murmur was almost imperceptible, the tension so thick it was like a living thing pressing down. Alyssa and Sarah exchanged glances, unsure how to intervene without fanning the fire. Sunny's hands flexed nervously in her lap, and Whoopi, ever the anchor, leaned slightly forward, her eyes narrowed as she assessed the growing storm. Joy's expression hardened, lips pursed in defiance. "Don't you dare try to make this about me," she warned, voice taut. Scarlett leaned forward, her gaze unwavering, the calm fury in her eyes cutting through the performative tension of the room. "Why not? You've made this entire interview about me and my supposed failings. You can't deny it." "Because I'm holding people with power accountable," Joy replied sharply. "Then hold me accountable for things I'm actually doing wrong now, not things I've already tried to make amends for," Scarlett shot back, her voice rising slightly, tremors of controlled rage weaving into each syllable. The studio felt smaller, the lights harsher, as though the walls themselves were pressing closer to the table. The audience leaned in instinctively, their collective breath caught in the anticipation of what would happen next. Every micro-reaction, an eyebrow twitch, a lip pressed tight, a subtle shift of weight, was magnified in the camera close-ups. The energy in the room was electric, a storm that had been brewing since Scarlett's first carefully measured smile on stage. Scarlett's voice dropped, almost a whisper, but laced with lethal intensity. You don't know the truth, Joy. You've created a narrative based on gossip, headlines, and assumptions. You've dismissed everything I've actually done to make amends. And now you're telling me there's no path forward. That's not fairness. That's cruelty. Joy's hands clenched subtly on the table, a faint tremor betraying the tension that even she could no longer hide. The audience gasped, a soft collective intake of breath, as though the room itself recognized the intensity of the verbal showdown. Scarlett leaned back, allowing a brief pause to let her words land, each syllable striking with the weight of accumulated frustration. I've put my money where my mouth is. I've amplified other voices. I've stepped away from projects when I realized the harm they could cause. But nothing I do seems to satisfy you. Why? The camera cut to Joy, eyes narrowing, jaw tight, and for the first time, the air of unshakable superiority wavered. Maybe I'm tired of public figures saying they're changing when the world still sees the harm done, she admitted, her voice less sharp, almost faltering. Scarlett leaned forward again, voice calm but piercing. Maybe it's time we all acknowledge something. Accountability isn't about power. It's about honesty, action, and the willingness to learn. Not perfection, not performative gestures, not endless judgment. You can criticize me all you want, Joy, but I've lived my truth, faced my mistakes, and actively tried to do better. What more can a human being do? The silence that followed was monumental, a pause so heavy it could have been felt in the audience's heartbeat. The cameras captured every flicker of motion, Joy's defiant stance softening ever so slightly, Whoopi's eyes narrowing thoughtfully, Sunny's fingers flexing, Alyssa's mouth parting as if to speak, and Sarah's hands pressed tightly together, tension radiating from her posture. Scarlett exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, the faintest smirk of quiet triumph crossing her lips. She gathered her purse, adjusted her posture, and rose with deliberate grace. Her voice carried clearly across the studio, calm yet commanding. Thank you to everyone else for having me. Joy, I hope you're proud of yourself. The audience gasped audibly. The studio lights glinted harshly against the polished surfaces, casting stark shadows across Scarlett's face as she walked toward the exit. Every camera followed, capturing the slow, cinematic drama of her departure. The tension lingered, almost tangible, a charged residue left in the wake of the confrontation. Joy's expression hardened, defiance flaring, yet even she seemed caught off guard by Scarlett's composure. Whoopi leaned back, arms crossed, voice firm. All right. That's enough. That interview went off the rails, and it's time we acknowledge that. Sunny exhaled, breaking the tension slightly. That was intense, she murmured, eyes scanning the stunned audience. Alyssa nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the retreating figure of Scarlett. The camera followed Scarlett as she walked out of the studio, head held high, a quiet aura of unshakable confidence surrounding her. Behind her, the echoes of her words lingered, the confrontation forever etched into the minds of everyone present, and soon, millions more watching from home. The silence was deafening, the energy palpable, and the lesson unmistakable: integrity, accountability, and the courage to stand one's ground in the face of relentless scrutiny are worth more than public approval. And then, as the credits began to roll across the studio screens and the audience slowly began to murmur again, the YouTube narrator's voice cuts in, cinematic and inviting. If you felt the tension, if you were on the edge of your seat watching this explosive confrontation, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe for more behind-the-scenes drama, and share this video so everyone can witness how courage meets controversy on live television. And don't forget to comment below, do you think Scarlett handled this the right way, or did Joy have a point? We want to hear your thoughts. The story isn't over until every voice has been heard. The studio lights dimmed slightly, the camera panning one last time over the shocked but captivated audience, before cutting to black. The echo of the confrontation, the tension, and the cinematic gravity of the moment lingered, a perfect storm captured for the world to dissect, discuss, and replay. Like, comment, subscribe, and share this video if you want more stories where Hollywood's biggest names face the toughest questions. Drop your opinion below. Who do you think won this battle of accountability versus perception?